Welcome again, everyone, to the first theme that we will be exploring. There will be 7 of them all together. The first one is food, the necessities of containment. Food is a very important aspect of ceramic and pottery forms, more specifically. And these two images are from Darfur, Sudan, from Africa. They're just a few years old, and you can see buildings built out of bricks and adobe, which is just clay, basically. And then there are pots lying around all over the place because the army came through, destroyed villages, broke everything, and so on. But returning inhabitants will still find grains at the bottom of those big pots and unbroken pots in which they can cook this leftover grain and resume a semblance of normalcy in those villages. So ceramic and pottery are at the center of this revival after destruction. In many cultures, potters make pots that are meant to be thrown away after one use. You buy them on the street either for yogurt or lassi in India, and then once you're done, you just throw them on the ground and they're discarded. And I myself bought those. It's only one, actually. It's 3 views of one throwaway lemonade cup from Mexico. It's thrown on the wheel, it's trimmed, it's bisqued, it's brought to the center of Mexico City where it is sold full of lemonade for about 10 cents. So you can imagine the cost of the pot and the income that this potter makes, making those pots that are then thrown away and discarded and broken on sidewalks downtown Mexico City. So clay is used in all kinds of ways in relation to food to make clay ovens in various countries all over the world up to today. In India, the tandoor is a type of oven specifically for the cooking of their food. And this is an example of a tandoor. They're always made out of fired clay. And as a graduate student, Ron Oblak explored the potential of a very specific type of stove called a rocket stove made out of clay for the burning of discarded newspaper and paper materials and so on. And those stoves are very economical to build, very sustainable to use, and very efficient to cook on. And in all kinds of cultures, again, historically and all the way to today, we find all kinds of stands and stoves and ovens and cooking utensils and equipments for the making of food. And we also find very specific utensils and implements for cooking: the tagine, the majmar, the chicken brick. In various cultures, people use ceramic and pottery forms for cooking very specific type of foods. In Korea, we have an example of that with the ongyi utensils. So some of you may want to research specific use of specific utensils in specific cultures as well. I bring to your attention the wonderful work of Ron Rivera, who started Potters for Peace, where they would go into all kinds of communities all over the world and build ceramic vessels that could be used for the filtering of water, the removing of pollutants and bacteria and things that would be detrimental to the health of those communities. And they've made tens of thousands of those all over the world. Recently, we have seen a resurging interest in ecology and in sustainable practices. And here we have examples of a worm composter, a water purifier, another example here of a worm composter. And ceramic is ideal for that because it breathes and it creates the environment perfect for composting. And this is one of the most interesting things I've ever found in ceramic in relation to food. It's Mohamed Bab Abbas from Nigeria who produced a produce cooler. And what happens is that if you put a pot within a pot and you put sand in between the two and you fill that sand with water, as the water evaporates, it will lower the temperature of the container and preserve the food contained inside for many times more the length of time it would otherwise in ambient temperature. And we have an example of that here for kitchens. Those two makers collaborating together made those coolers that you can have in your own home for the cooling of fruits and vegetables and their preservation. And in India, another potter invented the Miticool refrigerator on the very same principle. It's a double-walled ceramic object. You can fill it with water. The water evaporates, the temperature drops, and the produce are kept. We have an example here of a milk purifier, again, where milk is filtered through this ceramic object and removes contaminants. Those are very interesting examples of Hilda Elmstrom, who went to Fukushima in Japan and made dishes out of Fukushima clay, which is highly radioactive. And so there is a danger implied in the use of those utensils. And then Niels Ferber making radioactive plates. So if your food is radioactive in any way, the plate will notify you of the degree of radioactivity present in the food as you set it on those plates. And it's also very interesting to consider that the Amazon, which we think to be a wild area of the world that hasn't been cultured in any way, but this is not true at all. Thousands of square miles of the Amazon for thousands of years have been modified by the addition of carbon and broken pottery forms to make the soil better for cultivation. And this is true for thousands of miles all over the Amazon, actually. And those pots were specifically made for that purpose. They were built, dried, bisqued, fired, and then broken into small shards to be mixed with the earth to add to its quality. And then other artists working in ecological modes, here building ecological gardening for corals, putting ceramic elements in the sea to help with the growth of new corals. So ceramic has very interesting properties as well, and one of them is porosity. And here we have e-coolers, where if you fill them with water, evaporation will drop the temperature, and as the wind goes through the screen, on one side it will be warm and on the other side much cooler, because it will carry the coolness of evaporated water to the other side. Cipleti and Locatelli from Italy are making dishes out of shit. They actually collect human refuse, mix it with clay, and then make dishes with that material that they can then use and consume. Other people make all kinds of things with horticultural pots. The standard pots for planting and for gardenings and for flower starting and so on. And many artists have used that very beautiful standard form that stacks very readily, that's very cheap to produce, that works wonderfully well for its purpose, and transforming it here into light fixtures and so on. And in many restaurants now we find cooks who create food specifically for certain dishes, where sturgeon will be inserted as an image in a dish in relation with caviar and urchins and eggs and so on, while other makers have developed coffee makers, two very different designs of coffee makers here, incorporating ceramic as at the center of the process. And I end these sections by showing you one more time this wonderful pile of fruits by Gady Falk of Vancouver. And then Victor Sekansky with his wonderful preserves that he made for the last 50-60 years now. Now I have a section on revolutionary wares, because it's quite interesting to consider the relation to food in historical time, and this is just a brief introduction to a vast area of research and study. But right after the Russian Revolution, after the First World War, there was a famine in Russia, and many artists painting on porcelain blanks made wonderful work related to food products at a time of lack, Or again, Mikhail Adamovich making his wonderful plate that says in Cyrillic, "He who doesn't work doesn't eat." And in China, after the revolution, during the Great Leap Forward, all kinds of propaganda wares were made, pots and dishes to promote the revolution. And sometimes at a time of great famine and great strife and great lack of food, bowls for rice sported the slogan, "Overthrowing American imperialism." I have such a variety of work related to food today. This is an example here by Kiki Smith, a bowl containing internal organs which are related to the processing of food by human bodies. And then Sarah Osenton with her dishes for serving food showing the cross-section of the stomach. And Amanda Church with her Starving Child, which is a dinner set and utensil made for the serving of food in the shape of a starving child. And wonderful work by Anthony Gormley, pieces of bread that were eaten in the shape of his own body, leaving a void in that form within the stack of bread. And then I have a lot of contemporary examples of ceramic relations to food. And I will just go through a lot of this material without commenting much on it. I will say that Robert Arneson was one of the first to move away from functional pottery and make work that address issues of culture in his work. This is his celebrated "Things Go Better with Coke, No Deposit, No Return" from 1962. And then many people work with blood, bodily functions, bodily organs, the whole relation that we have between dishes and the consumption of food in various ways, the abject nature of blood and remnants within dishes and dirt and so on. It's quite interesting to see how quite a lot of those works have been produced recently by young makers within the field of ceramics, and people making dinnerware for all kinds of rituals and interactive performances. Some of those images I find on the internet are anonymous, so I don't exactly know who made this, but dishes made to be used in the context of eroticism and sensuality. Dishes that references, again, animal parts and meat aspects of eating, and introducing mouths within the context of dishes, or fingers, and so on. So all kinds of relations to the body and sensuality and ingestion are implied by the making of those types of wares. And this is celebrated contemporary artist Maurizio Cattelan making dishes in enamel on metal that spell "I love you." Artists from China referencing workers' lunch, and the whole cultural context of in various places, in various countries. And here we have Ai Weiwei with this very, very, very large dish. And the dish is a Western form in ceramics. It's not found readily in Asia. And Ai Weiwei introduces all kinds of comments around globalization by this kind of use at this kind of scale. He's also made very large rice bowls, and Antti Bremen fills a bowl with fruits and edible that you can't actually eat. People make dishes based on food as well, on fruits and vegetable and eggs, on garlic, on olives and olive oil. And stacks of plates are also quite interesting. I've shown you some of this material before, but it's interesting to see on the right how a stack of plate, once joined together and hollowed out, can become a flower vase. We have another example of that here made at Rosenthal. And the reassembly of found object related to food and to domestic environment is also very popular right now. Other example of stacks of dishes to create new forms. And even in the context of sculpture, Tony Cragg, Robert Terrien, making work of a very large scale, much larger than human size, to again make you reassess your relation to dishes, to food, to ceramic itself as an art form and its use of those materials and those shapes to create experiences for humans. People using dishes to speak of all kinds of very deep and important and sometimes troubling issues like war and terrorism and sensuality and the perceptions of female bodies through time, or people begging on the street, those very large begging cups by Matt Nolan. Antonia Herrera from Cuba again with her arroz y frijoles, which is rice and beans, the staple food of Cuba, and at times the only food available for the population to eat. Stefano della Porta making, again, simulation ceramics, which we've looked at before, but those objects are completely made out of ceramics, and they represent pasta, which is a staple food of Italy, which is where the artists come from. And other Italian artists I have mentioned before and shown their quite extraordinary work made completely out of ceramic material. Bertozzi e Cassoni, Anna Barlow. So this is a section that could have been included in the simulation aesthetics we've discussed previously, and some of those artists were included. But here I show you example of their work incorporating food and references to food. And the wonderful collection of Cookie Jar by Andy Warhol, who was an obsessive collector of ceramics and other things. Evelyn Grant from Calgary, making references to domestic chores, the role of women in domesticity, and how ceramic interface with all those complex societal issues. Mel Robson making a bowl with the recipe inside it to make a staple of some sort, or Stephen Bird with his cheese platter. And the wonderful meat carving dish by Paul Scott, which combines bone china in the making of the plate, and it's a meat carving dish that shows cow carcasses being burnt, and it's a conflation of material, image, and function that I have shown before, and I think this is an extraordinary example on how ceramic can come together at the level of material, at the level of representation, at the level of form, at the level of use, in ways that very few other art forms could say. They can conflate so many contrasting and complementary aspects within one rather simple and potentially dismissive object. Another very famous artist now, Damien Hirst, has commercialized all kinds of plates that he called superstition plate with mandala images. Emily Evans with her cellular plates, cells from testicule, from thyroid, from your liver, from your esophagus, as decorative surfaces on plates. And now I have a quite interesting selection on contemporary design itself. And the world of design also engages with food right now in quite amazing ways. This is plates becoming jewelry and fashion implements. This is a porcelain jukebox where if you put a dime into the jukebox, something is released and moves over those dishes and creates sound and music. Wedgwood, always a great innovator of all kinds of exciting forms. Here, an egg beater made in Queensware. And those funny little drip dishes, Splash Porcelain by Akimasa Yamada. Stacks of plates again, and totems being recomposed, tree forms, and so on. So creating sets that engage in various relationships is also very popular now. Ela Jungurius from Poland, a major designer working in all kinds of material, notably in ceramics, working here at Nymphenburg in Germany, and inserting a little figurine animal fused within the plates and the dish to again recontextualize various ceramic forms and challenge you to reassess your relationship to them. So all kinds of designers come up with various forms, sometimes in a very formalist way to create new shapes. And again, by sticking half a plate into a mirror, it becomes a full plate again, and you can use it just to drop your key when you get home at night. Daniel Wise from Australia, designing all kinds of materials and forms that come together in new ways to create new experiences. The idea to generate forms that engage you with new experiences is very popular right now. Those bento plate are meant to be held so that you can walk around with them in a party, and they're quite stable for that purpose. Or Aldo Backer making containers for specific use, the pouring or the dripping of bread in things. Alexander Ulm making a plate that if you break it, it creates two new smaller plates. Charlene Guillaume making a spoon with texture on it that enhances your experience of tasting and the enjoyment of food. And this is a series of images now by Ilan Sinai, who is Israeli, I believe, and who's made very interesting grouping of vessel forms to again challenge you to reassess your experience of food and experience food in a new way. And he's created sensuous tableware around the five senses. One of them is around touch, another one is around smell, another one is around taste itself, another one is around hearing, and all of them, and one of course is around vision, and all of them connected to new experience around food. And I find that quite interesting. I'm not saying those objects are particularly functional or practical on a daily way, but they certainly are interesting in all kinds of ways, notably at the level of form, the quality of the making itself, and also the fact that they create completely new experience to reassess your relationship to food as you actually use them. And many makers of dinner sets and dinnerware forms again make quite beautiful work and new work that expands on what's available on the commercial side of things. And the introduction of very interesting images, interesting surfaces that again creates all kinds of narrative intents and new relationship between things. And Willy Tsang, a Chinese Canadian designer you may want to research further, is one such designer. And work that can be combined and assembled and presented in all kinds of ways. A bowl that has a space for the leftover on the side, so if you're eating chicken, you can put the bones in that part of the dish. Quite a lot of very inventive forms are being generated right now that, again, I'm introducing you to quite a number of new makers, young designers who have invented new forms using new material that you may want to research much deeper than I can do here in this overview of that relationship. And this team from Israel again have made dishes with metal-based decals that can be electrified, plugged into the wall, and used to cook an egg or keep your food warm as you use it. And many people introduce other craft aspects like the use of textile, the use of embroidery, the use of fabric into dishes, or references to textiles, references to fabric, references to fashion into porcelain dishes. Or connection between the dish and the tableware and the tabletop and the tablecloth are also quite interesting to consider, so that you expand the meaning embedded in the dish itself into the whole environment on which it sits and on which it operates. A cup to contain coffee and cookies, or a plate that contains cocaine. So talking about anxious needs, about all kinds of issues that are quite prevalent in contemporary society right now, around food, around drugs, and around abuse and obsessive compulsive behavior. I really like this cup by Tail Design. As you fill it with milk, it creates the moon phases, going from the new moon to the full moon, depending on the level of milk you've added into the cup. And other artists do the same thing here with the image of a heart appearing, or somewhat three-dimensional effects being created by a liquid placed into those dishes, and depending on their level and the density of the material, it creates a illusionistic three-dimensional effect of great power. People generate dishes as well to help with mobility coordination if you have mobility issues, or dishes for impaired person who have difficulty holding things and holding implements and using them. Dishes specifically designed for those needs. Dishes to help people that are blind or visually impaired, to help them direct their knife towards the meat and give them clues for using. Again, a lot of this work is highly experimental, and it's not meant necessarily to be made into large quantities and be distributed worldwide for common use. But they do make you understand and reassess your relationship to food and to dishes and to domestic contexts. And like those wonderful plates by Alice Mara with digitally printed photograph of domestic environment within the context of plates, or plates that can be positioned on their side for storage, or a bowl that gives you just the right proportion of cereal to milk. You put milk on one side, cereal on the other, and then you can balance the amount of cereal you want to add to your milk and control that aspect of ingestions. Just a Novak with his tableware for introverts, which hides the food and people can't see what you're eating exactly. Are those dishes that you can hang into your laptop as you're using it, so that you can eat while using the obsessive compulsive nature of digital technology that has invaded all aspects of our lives. The anti-loneliness bowl, where you can put your iPhone within the bowl and never lose touch with your social context, or those sanitary cups that you never have to put upside down and make the lip in contact with other surfaces, so the rim never touches the table no matter which position it is set in. It just goes on and on. It's quite interesting to consider how many new design, new forms are being created for new purposes by all kinds of designers right now. I have shown you before La Boule, which is a stacked set of dishes that recomposes a perfect sphere. Creating dishes that can create sculptural environment and still life environment and be repositioned and reorganized in all kinds of exciting ways is very popular right now in the field of design. Dishes that become a cylinder stack and all the utensil in metal closing it and completing the ensemble. All kinds of very playful things as well to engage with humor, with pleasure, with fun, with getting children to eat more by making their dinnerware more pleasurable and more fun and more interactive. People making all kinds of sets in relation to geography and to nationality. And here we have an example of that by Ai Weiwei again with a map of China. David Lambert working in Vancouver in the 1950s, making dishes referencing First Nation aesthetics and forms and shape. This would be a bit more difficult to do today with the issue of cultural appropriation. But in the 1950s, this was a way to celebrate the environment in which the artist was working. The Collective General Idea from Toronto in 1988, making porcelain plates with TV color bars. This is not something you may be aware of, but when you open your TV in those years, you would get color bars, and they transferred this to porcelain dishes that then became large installations in institutional contexts. And even David Hockney, maybe the most famous living artist right now, certainly the most successful one, made a dog dish. I believe this is the only ceramic object the celebrated artist has ever done in his life, although he may have done a few things when he was a student in art school. And designer Karim Rashid also designing dog dishes. Or very celebrated British artist Tracy Emin also designed a cat dish. She's more of a cat person, I guess, than a dog person. And now I have another very interesting group of images that are about tables and table settings, because again, the table itself is a very interesting context for all kinds of ideas to be generated and analyzed and criticized. This is Roxy Payne, Dinner of the Dictators, where he has presented the favorite food of all the major dictators of the 20th century. And you know who those people are. Sculptor Charles Ray investigating how a table works. And he has made a series of those very interesting tables. For example, the one on the right, those objects are only appear to be set on a tabletop, but they are actually on a rotating platform and they spin in space and time very, very, very slowly to again make you aware of how a table works. Tom Dean, another artist from Toronto, it is large installation piece incorporating ceramic and tables and other material and other forms. Excerpt from a description of the universe is the title of the work. Anna Maria Maiolino with again rice and beans. Dear Human, a collective originally from Vancouver, now working in Montreal, made this piece at Medalta in Alberta using tableware fabricated at the factory in Medalta that were left over when the factory closed, and then creating this tabletop with table setting and food references as decals printed and fused onto the dishes. Potter Julian Stair, what he has done with this very interesting piece is that he has a projector in the ceiling of the gallery that project an image of people using those dishes in a performance piece. So it incorporates handmade pottery, the institutional context of museum display, the performance around using food, capturing the experience as a video and then projecting it over the ceramic objects and the table setting for the duration of the exhibition. People introducing a mirror under a table so that the underside of the dish where the decoration and interesting information is embedded becomes visible. Or a tablecloth printed with images of table setting on the fabric. Thérèse Chabot in Montreal with a wonderful light-based ceramic installation and a detail of a lithophan on the right with a self-portrait of the artist. You may want to research what is a lithophan, how it is made, and how it works. Caroline Cheng from Hong Kong, working in Jindajan and painting in a very free and spontaneous way tables and stools with her wonderful patterns. I have shown this wonderful set of 13 dishes by Marek Cicera before, showing The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. So again, wonderful relationship between form and surface and function and use with this image of those people sitting at a table and enjoying a meal on dinnerwares. Glenn Lewis from Vancouver in the 1970s made wonderful work in ceramic. This is his Last Supper piece. And then many other artists are working with the idea of the Last Supper. Julie Green went to prisons and interviewed death row inmates and asked them, what do you want for your last meal? And then she painted that last meal on a large series of hand-painted dishes that show the favorite food that those inmates who will be killed and, the favorite food they want for their very last meal. Barnaby Barfer with Map of the World as a decal inserted on a set of dishes. Many artists using dishes to introduce images of bodies, talking about race, talking about gender, sexuality, issues of identity. It's quite interesting to consider how the context of dishes and their relation to domesticity and food and generosity and sharing and so on can be inserted into the context of ceramics in very exciting ways. And those are just examples of a few artists working in the very recent past, incorporating new technology, digital printing, relationship between object and image in ways that are, I find, very potent, very strikingly exciting. The famous photographer working with self-portrait, Cindy Sherman, here in the context of historical porcelain form. Daniel Kruger with his obsession with La Callas, the opera diva, the famous singer, making a dinner set based on his obsession with her. So there are all kinds of ways ceramics and dishes and pottery form and those kinds of issues can be embedded in ceramics. And I find that quite exciting that how all over the world, in all kinds of countries, for all kinds of reasons, in quite a variety of very different contexts, people are using dinnerware and dishes to introduce sometimes content of great potency and the fact that those issues here around race are embedded in wallpaper and on porcelain dishes as well makes you reassess how a subject matter of such great importance finds itself on object of such familiarity and dismissiveness, and that contrast and conflict between the two enhance the potency and power of both. And I'm just trying to show you as many examples as I can find, but it's very exciting to consider what happens when issues of sexual identity find themselves embedded in that context, relations to the body, to the abject, to geography, or simply the reworking of very famous images within the context of giftware, as does Jeff Koons, for example, with his balloon dog plates, or Vic Muniz playing with his spaghetti and sauce on his plate and finding the image of Medusa, taking a photograph of it, creating a digital print and a digital decal, and then fusing it into the plate again so that it can then be commercialized, but it can also introduce an image within the context of further use for that plate. Many artists or collective of artists are now producing ceramic dinnerware to sell and commercialize and generate funds for their experimental practice in other material. Andrea Zittel is just such very famous avant-garde artist, multimedia artist who makes easy West works in ceramics for that very purpose. And then I cannot have a section on ceramic and food without talking of Judy Chicago's wonderful The Dinner Party. This is an example here of 2 plates from The Dinner Party. And Justin Yeager introducing images of sexuality in the context of dishes in ways that are quite confrontational. Robert Arneson with his Smorgasbord Bob, it's a self-portrait of the artist. And here again we have an illusion. The work seems to have a lot of depth and quite a large scale, and it's actually quite flat. And Bob is actually quite small at the back of his sets of dishes full of food. An artist like Vipul Srivilasav from Thailand, now living in Australia, makes ritual dinnerware where he makes all kinds of dishes and also cooks all kinds of food and invites friends over to have a ritual dinnerware. And then at the end of the meal, for which they have paid the artist, they get to walk away with the dishes as well. So it's a very interesting way to generate funds and create events and promote oneself in very original ways. So people make dishes with souvenirs of their childhood, their prior life, the historical context from which they come. Mili Chan making ceramic objects in the shape of body parts or very own body to make bread and then cook it. People have created all kinds of utensils for bread mixing spoons, for example, where each spoon is of a very specific size, whether you use it for water, for flour, for oil, for salt, and you can use them to create the exact proportions of material you use to make bread. People make all kinds of bread molds in ceramic. Bread mold in ceramics are very good for the cooking of bread. They've been used in historical time for thousands of years. And here we have two artists making just such molds. Jimili Hassan, again making reference to her Palestinian origin and the use of tea in ritual in relation to literature in her work Trilogy. Rory MacDonald from Canada, again making this large group of plates as if a truck has ran over them to create the pattern. Ian Johnson, another Canadian artist, is Machine for Singing, where an implement hits the balls and creates sound at very strategic time during the installation of the work. Artists making dinnerware for all kinds of performances and interaction with their ware. Lucy and Georgie Orga are two such persons who have made very, very large events, social events around food, in which they have made the plate over very sensitive issues and then made the food and served it and have created very exciting events. This is again example of their quite extraordinary work that they've done for many years now. Another example of that here by another artist incorporating images of police brutality and all kinds of political information embedded in plates, where this is more a fun image where this artist has created this machine to drop a slab of clay over a set of dishes to take an impression of that event. Now I have a brief selections of major contemporary potters working in ceramics now. Canadian Bruce Cochran and Neil Forrest in very different sensibilities. Tam Irving, Gwen Anson Piggott. It's quite interesting to consider how functional handmade pottery is in a revival right now as well, and very wonderful makers everywhere all over the world. This is a very brief, very superficial introduction to the work of some makers. I believe in the United States, Clary Ilian and Karen Carnes were, in my opinion, the two best functional potters, irrelevant of gender, working in the United States in the 20th century. And, you know, people making very inventive, very original, very personal forms, sometimes of great sensibility or of great crudeness and simplicity that is nonetheless very exciting because of that minimal, sort of almost excessive approach to simplicity that I have introduced to you before as well. And presenting ceramic forms in original ways to create sculptural units and sculptural presentation. And so it's quite interesting to consider, you know, that a potter making functional plates can still create an exciting aesthetic and dynamic and very original experience through the presentation of those quite ordinary plates in the end. Or taking plates and again presenting them in a way that prevents their use and function but creates a new experience within a sculptural context. While others really, you know, reassess the making of those forms, how they are meant to be handled, how they are meant to be used, what happens when you do such a thing. And I find it very exciting that within the context of handmade functional pottery, all of those investigations are taking place right now, and work of great fun sometimes happens, like this Perfect Pie by Richard Slee from England. Those are my very own plates. They are begging and grabbing bowls and plates. They have an image of a hand in each one of the plates and bowls, and if you put the hand in one direction, it is grabbing, and if you put it in the other direction, it is begging, so that the same hand can be engaging in either taking more than you need or asking for more when you don't have enough within the context of very functional dishes. Those are the wheel of nutrition plates that tell you how much of a certain food you would need if you want supersize, extraordinary, or if you want a diet, with the back of the plate giving you the code for the colors, referencing the amount of food you should be using in various contexts. Those portions plates, again, they are diet plates meant to shame you to use just the right amount of food if you want skinny jeans or your favorite jeans, or if you want to go to mom jeans by eating too much. And the very last image for today, the 2010 Year of the Rabbit 10,000 plates sculpture built in Jindajian, China, the porcelain capital of the world, to celebrate that year. And again, plates are at the center. Plates and porcelain and ceramics are at the center of this very important celebration yearly in China. See you next week for the shelter team around architecture, and have a good week. Oh, there is one more. Logan Criley, Craving for Coffee and Cigarette, which says it all. Well, there is one more still. Those wonderful ceramic and titanium stick-free non-stick cookware that are advertised on TV endlessly these days. And I really believe this is the last one. Yes, it is.